You don't need a bigger garden to grow more food. I grew 520 pounds of food last year, and it all came down to one thing: a better plan. In 2024, I harvested 452 pounds of food. But when I looked back at the season, all I saw was the missed opportunities. So going into 2025, I planned differently. I mapped out my space, I planned plant spacing appropriately, and I thought about timing. And with that same small garden, my harvest jumped up to 520 pounds. Every year, my planning gets better, and every year, my yield goes up. My goal for 2026 is 650 pounds without adding any additional space to my garden. So here's why planning makes such a big difference. Because honestly, most gardens don't struggle because they're too small. They struggle because there's too much empty soil. Once I started mapping things out, every inch had a purpose. Like with my tomatoes, I used to think things like, oh, maybe I can fit a few over there. But once I measured it out, it turns out I could fit 6. Another big thing that planning does is that it allows plants to share space instead of growing one thing at a time. Before, I'd plant something and wait for it to finish. Now I look at it and go, what can I grow alongside it? For example, onions take forever to mature, and there's all this space in between them early in the season. So now I'm going to try growing a quick crop of radishes and arugula alongside them. In 2025, I did this with radishes and carrots between my tomatoes plants, and it worked beautifully. This year, I'm even going to try beets there too. It's like getting a bonus harvest from spots that used to sit empty. This works so well for 2 main reasons. First, the radishes, carrots, and beets all go into the garden mid-spring, well before the tomatoes are ready to be planted out. This gives them enough time to get established and growing before the tomatoes move in. Second, they're not really competing for space. The root crops grow down into the soil and the tomatoes grow up the trellis. So you're using the same space but in 2 different directions. And then there's timing, which I totally underestimated at first. I only used to think about space, not about what happens when a crop is done. In 2024, I had a bed of lettuce that went to bolt early in the summer. I didn't pull it out right away and I didn't replant fast enough. That bed just sat there unproductive from July on. I tried tossing beets in later, but it was too late in the season and they never really produced. So when I'm planning, I'm always thinking, okay, when this finishes, what can go in next? That one change lets a bed produce 2 and sometimes 3 crops in a season. For example, in 2025, I planted turnips after I had harvested out my potatoes. The potatoes went into the garden in the mid-spring and they were ready for harvest by late July. That leaves me with about 75 frost-free days, plenty of time for another quick, cool weather crop. I planted turnips right away and they did amazing. That is a succession planting I will be repeating. Crops like potatoes are especially important to plan this way because when you harvest potatoes, you're digging up the whole bed. Anything you have growing alongside them would be destroyed. So instead of interplanting, they are a perfect candidate for succession planting. Planning also makes it easier to learn from year to year. Instead of everything feeling random, you can start seeing patterns emerge. Like in 2024, I tried growing acorn squash up a trellis. I didn't really love that, so in 2025, I switched to a bush acorn squash variety, and it did much better. But then there's things that surprise me in a good way too. One year, I planted my jalapenos behind my row of lavender and they thrived. Plus the combo of the jalapenos and the lavender blooming was beautiful. So of course I did more of that the next year. Planning helps you repeat the things that work and stop the things that don't. Another huge advantage to planning is being able to anticipate and manage pest problems before they begin. For example, I know my onions are going to be targeted by the allium leaf miner. So when I'm mapping out my garden, I'm making a point to plan to either cover them with row cover or to plant them at a different time to avoid that pest's most active stage of its life cycle. Building that strategy right into my plan means that I won't be scrambling halfway through my season trying to recover my crop. The same thing with my broccoli. If I don't cover them or treat them with BT, the cabbage moth will destroy the whole crop. Because I'm thinking of pests when I plan, I can ensure that I have the proper supplies and timing in place to protect those vulnerable plants. Planning isn't just about squeezing more food in, it's making sure that food also reaches harvest. Maybe my favorite part about planning is that it just makes gardening calmer. Before, spring felt chaotic. I buy plants without knowing where they're going and shuffling things around last minute. Now I go into the season knowing exactly when and where all the crops need to go. And this makes things far less stressful and I get way better results. For example, let's take this simple 3 by 6 foot garden bed. Here in zone 6, my last frost is about May 15th and my first frost is around October 10th. That gives me about 150 frost-free days. Along the north side, I'll add a tall vertical trellis so that I can grow up instead of out without blocking sunlight. So now let's start laying out what we want to grow. Along the back trellis, I'll plant a cherry tomato, a few slicing or paste tomatoes, and a cucumber. In front of those, I'll step down in height and plant peppers, mostly sweet peppers with a jalapeno thrown in there for fun. Then in the front corner, I'll plant a zucchini and let it spill out the edge of the bed, and some bulbing onions. And just like that, the garden is full. I fit 5 main crops into the small 3 by 6 space. But here's where planning really makes the difference. All of these crops, with the exceptions of onions, are heat lovers. They won't go into the garden until the soil warms up in late spring. And that means if we stop here, the bed will sit mostly empty for weeks. And even once we've planted everything out, the tomatoes, peppers, zucchini will all be tiny little babies that don't need all the space we've given them yet. So without planning, we will have wasted a whole chunk of our growing season. Instead, let's fill in those gaps. What are some cool weather crops that love spring temperatures? Carrots are a great one, and I found that they grow well tucked between carrots early in the season. We will definitely need some lettuce for salads, wraps, and tacos. I'm going to plant the lettuce in between where the peppers will eventually go in. To harvest it, I'll pick the outer leaves as it grows. It'll keep the plants tidy and give us fresh greens until the heat of the summer, and the peppers will take over. Onions also love cool spring weather, so we'll add some green onions around where the zucchini will eventually be seeded. I have found that this helps a little bit with pest pressure, plus we'll get some early onion flavor for our meals. Now, bulbing onions already go in mid-spring, but at first they're just little grass-like shoots. That leaves space for a quick crop of radishes. Since radishes grow fast and stay small, they're great for along the edge of the bed as well. And just like that, we've added 4 more crops to this garden bed. Same garden, way more food. Now let's think about what happens later in the season. Once those spring crops have been harvested out and those heat lovers take over, some space starts to open up again. The bulbing onions will be ready for harvest around late July. And since our first frost date isn't until mid-October, that leaves me with about 75 to 80 days for another crop. That's the perfect window for something like bush green beans. The lettuce between the peppers will finish up too. So I'll plant a heat-tolerant variety of lettuce right in front of that row of bush green beans and keep our salads coming all summer. Then in mid to late September, I'll replace that lettuce with a cool-loving variety to keep the salad coming throughout the fall. Everything else will stay in the garden until frost. However, because I prune the lower leaves of the tomatoes on the trellis, there'll be a little bit of space between the tomatoes and the peppers, perfect for herbs like basil. Now look at this bed. Instead of just 5 crops, we've turned it into tomatoes, cucumber, peppers, zucchini, bulbing onions, carrots, lettuce, multiple rounds, green onions, radishes, bush green beans, and herbs, all in one small 3 by 6 space. And that's the power of planning. And the best part, because we've planned it all out ahead of time, we know exactly what seeds and plants we need and when. So nothing gets missed and no space gets wasted. Planning is the multiplier. It's how you turn a small garden into a productive one. It's how you get multiple harvests from the same space. It's how each year gets better than the last. In the next video, I'll show you how I map out garden areas based on their unique condition, from their sunlight exposure to their first and last frost days. And you need this as the base of your crop planning.